Okay, let's start with a really big idea. What if? What if all of human history wasn't just a series of random events, but a single, massive accumulating debt? Well, today we're diving into a really fascinating sermon from 1980 by Reverend Sun Myung Moon, the founder of the Unification Church. And his whole argument is built on exactly that idea. It's a pretty radical take on history, on geopolitics, and it lays out a universal mandate for his followers. So let's get right into it. So this is the core question the whole sermon is built around. Just think about that for a second. What if every failure, every single division, every tragedy from the dawn of time has all been piling up into this one massive spiritual debt? A debt that has finally come due, and it has to be paid off right now by this one single generation. It's a huge premise. All right, to really understand how the sermon arrives at its pretty startling conclusion, we're going to follow the logic step by step. First, we'll look at its diagnosis of history as just a long series of failures. Then, we'll see how world religions and nations fit into that picture. And then, we'll get to the sermon's radical solution, a final religion, a new central figure, and a very, very specific mandate for everyone that leads to this big prophetic call to action. Okay, part one, a history of failure. According to this sermon, if you want to understand the present, you have to go all the way back to the beginning, to one single, catastrophic failure. According to this worldview, the root of all our suffering is surprisingly simple. It all goes back to one single moment, Adam's failure. That one event is said to have split humanity in two, creating this timeless struggle between two opposing forces, a struggle between what the sermon calls Cain and Abel. So, okay, if there's this huge spiritual debt, how in the world do you pay it off? This is where the sermon brings in a really key concept. The word is indemnity. And the best way to think about it is like a spiritual mortgage. Every single failure in history just added to the principal. And now the bill has come due. A massive payment is needed to clear the books and, restore things to how they were supposed to be. And this whole process of paying off the debt happens across different eras, or what the sermon calls dispensations. So in this view, history isn't random at all. It's actually a series of distinct stages in a divine plan. And each stage has its own rules, its own key figures, and its own unique missions. So that brings us to section 2, the debt of religions. Right, so who's been in charge of paying this cosmic debt all this time? Well, the sermon points directly at the major faiths and the big world powers. The sermon lays out this very clear line of succession. First, it says Judaism had the central role. Then Christianity took over the baton, and its job was to expand the mission across the whole world. But, and this is absolutely crucial, the sermon argues that neither of them managed to fully pay off that historical debt. And this, of course, sets the stage for a final religion to show up and, well, finish the job. And then, this whole religious struggle gets mapped directly onto Cold War geopolitics. It's fascinating. The sermon frames the entire global conflict of the 20th century as a battle between an Abel force, that's God's side, led by America, and a Cain force, which is embodied by Soviet communism. So all of a sudden, the biggest conflict of the modern era becomes the final act in an ancient spiritual war. All right, section 3, the final central religion. So if the established religions and the world powers have kind of dropped the ball, what happens next? Well, the sermon argues that a new final religion has to emerge to pay off history's debts, once and for all. And this is where the sermon makes its central, most important claim, that the Unification Church is that prophesied final religion. Its purpose isn't just to be another faith tradition. No, its purpose is to be the actual vehicle for liquidating all of that accumulated debt of history, and to do it all within a single generation. Now, crucially, this mission is expected to be incredibly difficult. This quote explains why. Because this new religion is designed to end the war with Satan, it is destined to face immense opposition. So from this point of view, suffering and tribulation, that's not a sign of failure. It's actually proof of the mission's divine importance. The sermon even pinpoints a specific time frame for this crisis, the 40 years leading right up to 1980. Now, that number, 40 years, is heavy with biblical meaning, and it marks a period where the Abel forces, Christianity and America, were seen as collapsing morally, which allowed the Cain force of communism to just spread like wildfire across the globe. So, let's move on to section 4, a new central figure. Because if you have a new central religion, well, you're going to need a new central figure. And the sermon now shifts its focus to its founder, Reverend Moon. This quote here really captures how Reverend Moon sees his position. It presents him as a solitary warrior, the last defense for God's side against a world of ungodly forces. His own personal perseverance is framed as nothing less than the entire world's last hope. And his mission, as the sermon lays it out, is just monumental. I mean, it's not just about leading a church. It's about him personally paying off all of history's indemnity, awakening failing nations like America, and establishing a completely new God-centered tradition for all of humanity. And it all starts with creating one perfect family and then expanding out from there. So the big question is, how does this grand cosmic vision actually translate into action for an individual person? Well, the sermon lays out a very specific system that allows every single follower to participate directly in this historical restoration. And the heart of it is what's called the home church system. So each member gets assigned a geographic area, specifically 360 homes. And in that area, they have to follow a path that basically mirrors Reverend Moon's own journey. They start at the very bottom as a servant of servants, then they have to earn their place, become a true spiritual son, and eventually a spiritual parent to the people in their assigned area. Now, this whole path is built on sacred numbers. A follower has to first build a spiritual family of 12 people, then a tribe of 72. That creates a total foundation of 84 people. The sermon claims that if you can achieve this specific number, you create an unshakable spiritual foundation. I mean, the literal building block for the kingdom of heaven on earth. And that brings us to the conclusion. And it's really less of a summary and more of an urgent prophetic charge to everyone listening, outlining the massive stakes for the immediate future. So this spiritual battle is given concrete geopolitical targets. The sermon identifies America's centers of power, the White House and the State Department, as the first walls of Jericho that need to fall, spiritually speaking. But the ultimate target, the final stronghold of that Cain force, is explicitly named as Moscow. And there's an incredible sense of urgency here. The sermon declares that the next 7 years are a critical window of time, a showdown with the world. In that time, followers are mandated to go out and build their foundations, and the very fate of the world is said to depend on whether or not they succeed. And the sermon ends on this really powerful note, a transfer of responsibility. After laying out this entire cosmic history, Reverend Moon declares that his personal task is done. The baton is passed, the entire mandate now rests completely on his followers. And it leaves us with a really provocative final thought. What would you do? I mean, really, what would you do if you believed the weight of all human history rested squarely on your shoulders?